Do you know someone, or are you someone who's clearly outgoing on the outside? Like, you're funny, you're expressive, you have a lot to say. But when you are around people, in groups, in relationship, at work, with your family, something that pulls you back. You get quiet, you go along, you don't cause trouble, you don't rock the boat. You make sure everyone around you is comfortable, even if you yourself are not. And from the outside, people call you easygoing, low maintenance, sweet, calm. But on the inside, you're exhausted. You're not even sure why. If that is you or someone you love, stay with me, because today we're going to go in depth about something that most people have never heard of, and something that sits right alongside with PTSD and ADHD, and explains so much as to why some of us move along the way we do. We're talking about the fawn response. So I know a lot of us have heard about the three trauma responses, right? Fight, you get angry, you push back, you defend yourself. Flight, you run, you leave, you disappear from the situation. Freeze, you shut down, you go blank, you cannot move or respond. So those are the three that get all the attention. They're in the textbooks, they're on TikTok. People understand them very well. But here's the fourth one, and we talked about it briefly, or you can say, briefly on our previous episode, which I'm gonna link it on the description box. If you haven't already watched it, go ahead and watch it, or just go through our playlist. So, it's the most invisible one, the fawn, okay? The fawn response is the most invisible of them all because it does not look like fear. It does not look like survival. It looks like kindness. You're like, kindness, huh? So the fawn response is a trauma-driven pattern of people-pleasing behavior designed to diffuse danger when the brain senses threat, especially social and relational threat, right? The survivor may instinctively placate, appease, or over-accommodate. I meant palliate, not placate. I don't know what placate means. Now, this term was named by a psychotherapist, Pete Walkers, in his book called Complex PTSD From Surviving to Thriving in 2013. And what he identified was this: when fight, flight, and freeze are not available options, when you cannot fight back, you cannot run, cannot shut down, the nervous system finds a fourth exit, and that exit make yourself so agreeable, so useful, so unthreatening that nobody has a reason to come for you. I mean, people still do, but that is the found response, okay? And that's one of the most common patterns in people carrying both ADHD and PTSD at the same time. Let's talk about science real quick, even though I don't really like science. I'm not really good at science or math. But so I think when you understand what's happening neurologically, it changes how you see yourself or how you see the person you're thinking about right now. The amygdala, right? The brain threat detector triggers the fawn response when flight, and freeze seem futile, right? It perceives inescapable danger and shifts as social appeasement, releasing this oxytocin, a endorphin, to calm the situation through harmony. So this disconnects the rational prefrontal cortex, prioritizing instinctive compliance over self-preservation. So in plain language, what does that really mean? The survival brain moves faster than thinking brain, right? So before you even consciously decide what to do, your nervous system has already calculated the safest move, and the safest move is learned somewhere along the way was to become what other person needed you to be. Okay, the prefrontal cortex, which governs the rational thought and self-regulation, may become less active in the moment of stress, leading to instinctive people-pleasing behaviors, right? And this is why a person who fawns will sometime agree to something and then immediately feel wrong about it, or say yes when the whole body was screaming no. And it's something that's the survival part of the brain fired before the rational mind could catch up, right? And by that same thinking brain, the thinking brain arrived, the yes was already out of the mouth, and now they have to live with it. So what does it look like in real life? And that's the part I'm going to want you to pay attention, because the fawn response is the most invisible trauma response precisely because it looks like virtue. It looks like the person who never says no, who says yes to things they absolutely don't want to do, because the anxiety of saying no is worse than the inconvenience of saying yes. It looks like being hyper aware of everyone else's mood. A person exhibiting a fawn response often develops a heightened sensitivity of moods, needs, and expectations of others, and they become like a human barometer, right? Constantly scanning the environment for potential threats, or signs of disapproval. So when someone walks into the room with a certain energy, they feel like before anyone else does, they adjust, they soften, they prepare to accommodate. Before the person has even said a single word, it looks like apologizing constantly. Rally, oh, okay. Appeasing, right? For things that do not require an apology, for having an opinion, for asking a question, for taking up space. It looks like agreeing with people you privately disagree with, not because you changed your mind, but because disagreement feels genuinely unsafe in your body. Like it looks like making yourself smaller in groups, letting other people lead even when you have something valuable to say, something quiet, not because you have nothing to contribute, but because being visible feels like a risk. And it looks like being praised by everyone for how easygoing and kind and low maintenance you are, while inside you're completely depleted and slowly disappearing. So the fawn response is the most invisible trauma response because it looks like kindness. The person who never says no, who anticipates every need. The nervous system is not generous. It is terrified, and it's learned that the only safe thing to do. No, the only safe thing to do, to be is not to do, to be is useful, right? So the nervous system is not generous. It is terrified. That's why it's doing what it's doing. So we're going to talk about what actually starts, because it rarely starts in adulthood. It almost always begins. Everything begins markuna yaraini when we were younger, okay? The fawn response often originates from this rational trauma, which occurs within the context of close relationship, often like caregivers or authority figures like our parents. So as children or abusers, our brain has been hardwired for connection. Our survival literally depends on the care and approval of those around us, right? When care, look at you, if you're a mom or your parent, look at how your kids depend on you emotionally, and psychologically, all of that stuff. So when caregivers are emotionally unavailable, critical, or abusive, the developing brain adapts by prioritizing behaviors that maintain like that rational harmony, even if it means suppressing your personal needs or boundaries, right? So in practical terms, I would say a child who grew up in a household where parents' anger was unpredictable learned very early on the safest thing to do was to keep the parent calm, anticipate their moods, stay small, do not cause trouble, be good, be helpful, be invisible, be helpful, be invisible when necessary. And it worked. It kept them safe enough. So the brain recorded it. This is how we survive generally, right? And then that child grew up. They carried that recording into every relationship, every workplace, every friendship, every marriage. Hopefully he's only had one marriage. But even when the original threat is completely gone, chronic fear and hypervigilance wire the nervous system to detect danger in others' moods or reactions. When a child learns that their own needs or boundaries lead to rejection, anger, or punishment, they survive by adapting to that parent's needs. Over time, that the survival mechanism evolves into people pleasing, emotional codependency, which we're going to talk about eventually, and self-neglect. We're going to talk about that too. So adults who fawn often struggle to express disagreements, make decisions for themselves, or feel comfortable when others are upset, right? And here's what makes it so complicated, especially in our Somali community, in our diaspora, in our African community, whether you're Black American or African American, right? Because in many of our households, this pattern was not just accepted, it was rewarded. The child who never caused trouble, who was always respectful, I'm not saying be disrespectful to your parents, but who never talked back, you can't even answer back the question that these African parents ask. It's considered talk back, right? Who made everyone comfortable. That child was, called well raised, good, obedient. That was me. I was that child growing up. Even to now, I feel like I'm still that child. I'm a little bit more rebellious now, you can say. In a sense, I'm not just a yes girl. You know what I mean? But going back to it, you're the obedient child, well raised. Nobody looked underneath that obedience to ask, but is this child okay? Is this child, why am I saying like that? Is this child actually happy, or are they just terrified? right? Let's go back to ADHD piece, because this is where it gets really specific and really important. ADHD already comes with something called masking. Masking is the constant effort to appear more organized, more focused, more neurotypical than you actually are. It's exhausting work that most neurotypical people never have to do. Just existing in the world that was never built for your brain requires performance. Now, add the fawn response on top of that. For some neurodivergent adults, the whole fawn pattern can be even harder to spot, because masking, self-monitoring, people pleasing have already been part of the daily life. So now you have a person who's simultaneously masking the ADHD and fawning their trauma. Two full-time invisible performance running at once, and from the outside they look calm, reserved, easy, put together. Inside, war, run. They are completely exhausted. Okay, we are running on empty tank. Okay, running on empty, and we cannot even fully explain why, because both performances have become so automatic that we have forgotten we're performing at all. This is exactly what we're talking about earlier. The person who knows they're outgoing, expressive on the other episode, right? They're expressive, or earlier in the episode, expressive, full of personality, but who shows up reserved, careful, and conflict free in every situation. That is not who they are per se, right? That is what they learn to do to stay safe. And there is a massive difference between the two, right? Now, what happens in the long run? This is because finding works in the short term. You avoid the conflict, the other person says calms, you feel relief. The relief is real, but the long-term cost is enormous. Every time you override your own limits, the body learns that your needs are less important than safety. Every time you make yourself smaller to make the peace, that old fear gets reinforced. Some people carry deep belief that holds the pattern in place. I am responsible for how others feel. If I disappoint someone, I will lose them. If I am direct, I'm cruel. If I need too much, people will leave. So these beliefs sit quietly underneath the surface. Most fawners, I don't know if that's a word. Most fawners fawners do not even know they have them until someone starts asking the right question. So over years, decades of fawning, a person can completely lose touch with who they actually are, what they want, what they feel, what they believe, because they spent so long performing a version of themselves that everyone else around them to make them comfortable, and their real self has completely gone quiet, right? So without practical regulation, fawning leads to chronic hypervigilance. This lowered immunity and autoimmune issues and inflammation. So the constant hypervigilance of fawning is exhausting and can lead to the state of chronic anxiety, which most people have. And here's the painful irony, right? Founders are often the most deeply empathetic, genuinely caring people in any room. The problem is not their character. The problem is that their kindness is not coming from a full cup. It's coming from fear. And a person giving from fear cannot sustain that indefinitely. Like, eventually they will crash, they will burn out, they will disappear into resentment and exhaustion and quiet grief for the self they have never been in years. So how can you tell like genuine kindness and fawning, right? Because I think a lot of people reading themselves into description might feel the same. And it's not about shame, right? Genuine kindness comes from a choice and it feels energizing. Found based people pleasing come from fear, and you will know the difference, right? Is very, very depleting, right? The test is, if saying no produces anxiety disproportionate to the situation, the behavior is likely fawn driven. And think about that. The next time you feel like your anxiety is rising when someone asks you for something and part of you wants to say no, pause. Ask yourself, is this situation actually dangerous? Is this person actually a threat? Or is my nervous system reading this moment through a lens from a very, 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 very long time ago, right? And because that is what is happening. The nervous system doesn't know the difference between now and then. It just knows it learned something once, and it will keep using that lesson even when the classroom has long, you know, been closed. It's like us women bringing an argument from 1985 to our spouses. They long forgot about it, but us were like, sir, and I did not forget. Oh, I did not forget. So this makes you vulnerable. Fawning makes you vulnerable. So characteristic, right, include overdependence on the opinions of others and lacking boundaries. If a person is, it makes a person highly vulnerable and narcissistic people, sorry, or anyone who tends to control and manipulate others. So that's why founders often end up in relationship, romantic, friendship, families, or professions where they are giving everything and receiving very, very, very little, because they have been wired to accommodate, and certain people can sense accommodation, like narcissists, right? They are drawn to it. It feels like a permission, and the founder stays because leaving requires asserting a need, and asserting a need feels dangerous. So they manage and manage and manage until they cannot anymore. And when they finally break, people around them are like, make it DT or make it D. Like, what is wrong with this person? They have changed. What is going on? Because from the outside, they always seemed fine. They never complained. They never made it a problem. So where did this come from? It comes from years of swallowed mayas, years of swallowed no's, years of performed yeses, right? Years of staying small so that someone else could stay comfortable. So let's put a little bit of faith in here. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever among you sees evil, let him change it with his hand. If he cannot, then his tongue. And if he cannot, then with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith. So I want you to notice something about the hadith. Even on the level of the heart, you are allowed to know something is wrong. You are allowed to internally disagree. You are allowed to hold a boundary in your own heart, even when you cannot yet enforce it in your life. Right? That's not a deficit. That's not a defeat, right? That is the beginning of a journey back to yourself. And that's something else. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Surah Ra'd, indeed Allah will not change the condition of people until they change it, what is in themselves, or something along those lines. So you're allowed to change. You're allowed to stop performing. You're allowed to stop making yourself disappear so other people can feel comfortable. That is not selfishness. That is stewardship of amana that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you. Your own self, your own choice, your own life. You're not created to vanish into someone else's comfort zone. You were created to be here fully, completely you. So how can you start healing? Notice your body before you respond. Okay, that's a big thing. Before the automatic yes comes out, pause even for 2 seconds. What is happening in your chest, your shoulders, your stomach? That is data. Your body is trying to tell you something. Start listening. Practice micro boundaries, right? Start with low stake situations like choosing where to sit, or I need a minute. Scalp over weekends or something. This retains the nervous system to learn setting limits does not threaten safety. And you need to learn how to tell guilt from danger. When you set a boundary and feel bad, the feeling is usually guilt, not actual danger. The nervous system reads the same thing. Guilt passes by, not built. Danger is immediate. Most of the time when you feel bad about saying no, we're feeling guilt, not facing actual threat. Therapy, as I mentioned in the other one, the EMDR, somatic therapy, and internal family system therapy are all evidence-based approaches that work directly on the nervous system and the trauma-based belief underneath fawning. And the community, find people around you who being yourself doesn't feel dangerous, because the nervous system learns from experiences. Every relationship where you say something honest and the person says every moment where you disagree and the bond survives, your nervous system is collecting evidence. The evidence is safe to be real. The safety does not require performance, right? So the fawn response, in short, isn't who you are. It's a survival skill. What you learn to do to stay alive. Recognizing this pattern isn't about shame. It's about clarity. It's not about you being weak. It's not about you being defeated or deficit in something, right? You just have to find the right group, the right approach to heal. And with clarity comes the quiet power to rewire that fear driven pattern and rebuild a life by choice and not by compulsion, right? You are not born to say yes when you mean no. You're not born to make yourself small so that everyone around you could feel big. You are not born to disappear. You are born to be here loudly, fully, in your whole complicated, wonderful self. The Fawn response just made you forget that for a while. And now you remember. I leave you all in the care of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't liked, subscribed, commented, liked, and shared, I don't know what you're waiting for, but please go ahead and do that. Bye.